Hey, fellow makers, this is the Red Wizard, and you are listening to the Cut It Out podcast. Today's host is the very talented Michael Velliquette. Michael is a professional papercraft artist, and he recently has been making some really awesome, intricate paper sculptures. He's also a teacher, an art educator at the University of Wisconsin, Maddison. Um, Now, before we have Michael come into the show, I want to do a shameless plug for my online affiliate store. A lot of you are making collages and paper crafts already. So if you're going to buy some tape and glue sticks, or even if you need your sixth or seventh George Foreman grill, if you go to my Amazon affiliate page, Jeff Bezos will throw me a few pennies if you click on those links and make your purchases after. Also, I recently updated my own store. So if you are thinking about buying gifts for the holidays, maybe your secretary needs a really awesome psychedelic surreal collage, I'm the man for you. So I worked the past few months, I worked on trying to get more things on my store. So yes, stocking stuffers, got some zines, got some posters, and I got one t-shirt up. It's the t-shirt I'm wearing right here. So yeah, check that out. I will put the links in the show notes. All right, without further ado, let's have Michael Veliquette join us. Oh, got to move that out of the way. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Hey, good. Whoa, that intro is amazing. Totally amazing. Totally impressed by your setup here. It's so cool.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I haven't figured out how to mesh VHS aesthetic with paper yet. That's the closest I've
Oh,
gotten.
I think you're doing it. It's phenomenal.
So thank you so much for being here. You are the first papercraft artist on the show. You are fully papercraft for now, right? Is that mostly what you do? Make stuff out of paper?
Yeah, I mean, I work almost exclusively with paper, though. I have a pretty my background's in mixed media, sculpture and drawing, and I've done kind of a lot of different things, but really like the kind of focus of what I do is paper based.
Was there a particular reason that you decided to go full on in paper? And I'm asking because when I knew for myself that I needed to like kind of rein myself in, I decided I'm only going to make collage, and I've been doing that for about 4 years. Why did you decide to just zero in on paper?
Well, so I've been working with paper for since 2005. So almost like exclusively like fully paper based work. So it's about 15-ish years.
Wow.
And so my background is in, like I said, it was in mixed media sculpture and installation. And so I made a lot of different kinds of, like my early work, like in graduate school and kind of right out of school, I made a lot of kind of ornamental sculptures and collages actually with cardboard and tape and tinfoil and plywood, a lot of things that I could manipulate really easily and build really quickly and sort of layer these sort of dimensional sculptures and collages. And paper was always a component of some of those works. And so my transition to kind of fully paper work was really by accident. A lot of artists kind of, I think, end up kind of working in their chosen medium this way. Like it was working in my studio in around 2004, 2005, trying to think of some ideas for some larger mixed media works. And I just started making some studies with these small, 12 by 12 inch studies with just colored cardstock that I had that was left over from a big installation I had just finished.
Mm-hmm.
When I made those first couple of studies, it was like, whoa, like the studies looked better than the work that I was planning to do, which is often that, sometimes you don't really know, you have a vision for what the thing's going to be, but then the thing that you're making kind of on the way there ends up kind of what you get sort of pulled into. And so that really kind of hooked me. I made a couple of these like small cut paper collages, and I've got images on my website. If you look at my website and it says the early work,
Okay.
that's like the whole archive of that work going back for like 15 years. And actually I have an example of one I can pull out and show you later. But that was really, and then I started getting some success with them, which also is kind of encourages you to continue doing the things that you're
Sure.
doing. I was
Mhm.
making and showing them a lot. I was able to sell a couple of them, and that just really kind of focused my work working with paper. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I started really thinking about paper material, like critically. I started thinking about like why I like to use paper. It was really just something that I had around that was
Mhm.
easy to work with and I enjoyed handling, but I wasn't thinking about like what paper is and what it does and what the history of paper is. And I wasn't thinking of myself as like a paper crafts person. You asked like sort of how I describe myself in the beginning, and like the question of like how you present as an artist or what label you give yourself is something that's always kind of like changing for me. For years, I was just like, I'm just an artist, or I'm just a sculptor, or just maybe I'm a paper artist. But then more recently, I've been thinking about these terms, because I want to kind of profile that paper is something important to my practice. So I've been using terms like paper craftsman, which is kind of loaded gender wise, like paper crafts person,
Yeah.
paperist, but sounds super dorky. So I would never use that. But yeah, so
I
it's
have
been
to I
sort of
have
an
to
evolution.
apologize because I purposely kept myself, naive, if you wanna put it, about papercraft stuff. So I
Yeah,
don't even know if that's the best term. Like, even if you're searching on Google, I don't even know if that's the best term.
yeah.
So I figured, you know what? I'll talk to Michael. He'll tell us about it. So,
We can talk about that too. Yeah, I mean,
mhm.
there's all those terms are kind of loaded, and people have different relationships to them.
So, yeah, paper is a crazy thing because it's ancient, yet it's it's can be very fragile, yet it can be very strong.
Mm,
Um, it can be its own texture. It it can fade. To me, it almost has architectural properties. And then when things are printed or exposed, it almost has like properties of mind or memory. Like it fades, it weathers, it stores information. Um, like when I look at sheet music, I think like, oh, that's just like analog code to tell a whole bunch of small machines like what to play. So paper's a huge world, and I've only been doing this for 4 years, and you've been doing this for how long did you say, like 15 now? That's awesome. So let's get right into it. So my initial observation is that paper art seems to occupy a strange place, even like just dimensionally. You could have totally flat paper art that would be like an illustration, or you can make three-dimensional sculptures, such as yourself. And then I've noticed that there's also this weird middle space that comes up from time to time in children books illustrations or photographic illustration in the 80s, where people use three-dimensional like paper diorama things and then photograph them, and then that becomes your document. Um, Without putting you on the spot, but totally putting you on the spot, is there like a few are there like a handful of like kind of major branches of paper art to help people navigate like this new world for the Red Wizard?
yeah, I mean, totally. First of all, I'm super honored to be the first like sort of like pure paper based artist that you've had on. And so this is all my perspective. Other people might have a different way to thinking about this. So paper art. I always think about when I first started thinking about paper. First of all, there's a really great book by a guy named Mark Kurlansky that is just called Paper. I actually have a copy of it right here. I pulled
Cool,
out
I'll
some things
take a
that I
note of that. Sure.
thought.
All right,
Um,
cool.
so this is a great book by Mark Kurlansky that talks about the history of paper and sort of how it evolved and why humans started making paper and why they started using it. And so, one of the things that I kind of got out of this book is we're thinking about, like, traditionally he talks about how paper really evolved as like, as you're saying, sort of a surface to put information on, as
Mhm.
to keep records, and it really helped societies and civilizations develop because we
Sure.
could write things down, and exchange them and keep records of things and create bureaucracies and all those things. But really, and then there's this relationship to art making, right? So paper sort of fits into all areas of the arts, like painting and sculpture, because art, even non-paper based artists or paper artists will make maquettes out of cardboard or something as a sort of like step towards a final thing, and a lot of artists are drawing as a kind of way to get to another kind of form. And so and a lot of like other art forms like printmaking has like a process that involves paper. And so, but it's always about like the paper itself, right? Like the blank sheet, what's on it, right? And so when we think about paper historically, it's about what's on the surface, and what kind of world that's creating, whether it's a poem or a text that's sort of alluding to something else in the world or an image that we're supposed to get pulled into. And so, but there is this other tradition that happens simultaneously to sort of paper as a surface, or as paper as a material, as an object. And so paper has been used traditionally to make things like, to build things, right, in architecture and in shoes and lamps, and so it's had a functional place as a material. But artists have always also used paper, not just as a ground to work on, but as a surface. So some of the earliest forms of paper art were in China were paper cuts, these negative paper cuts that were cut to sort of hang on houses as talismans or things like that. They had a lot of like ceremonial and religious uses. But pretty quickly, as paper evolved and became more prevalent throughout the globe, different paper art forms did sort of trail along and sort of come up around that: paper cutting and paper folding and quilling and things like that. And so one of the ways that I'll use this as an example again, because this kind of gets to your question about like what paper art is and the way I think about it and what kind of unifies all different kinds of paper art forms. And first of all, I think Papercraft is a totally decent, like I use Papercraft, I use paper art, I use them interchangeably. None of those, and most artists I know who work with paper embrace all of those terms. Okay. So with like a sheet of paper, one of the things that I started thinking about is when I started my practice, when I started taking it more seriously in terms of like, what is this material and what can it do? And what is the history of the material? And what are the parts of the material that I can exploit if I'm only using a sheet of paper, right? And so, when we think about a sheet of paper, it's I always think about it as having three constituent parts. There's the shape, right? In this case, it's square, but it doesn't have to be. You can cut it in different, and certainly this relates to collage, right? You're dealing with shape. There's the edge of the sheet, and that relates to the thickness or the ply or whatever texture you put into it. And then there's the surface area, and that could be color, it could be texture. This is a heavyweight sheet of watercolor paper, so there's some texture to it, and it's just white, but that could be color. I could add some sort of rough kind of texture to it in the process of working with it. For collage artists, that would mean whatever picture is on the surface, whatever printed pattern or material. And so what kind of unifies all paper art at the outset is the artists are approaching paper and exploiting one of those constituent parts. They're either really working with the edge, they're working with the shape, or they're working with the surface. And so, for instance, something like origami, which is a form of paper folding, that's really exploiting all three. It's sort of scoring the surface to bend it and to fold it. It's creating different edges as it goes along to kind of create this three-dimensional form. Whereas something like quilling, which is rolling long strips of paper into coils and shapes, that really exploits the edge almost exclusively to build those kinds of forms. And so, within those, some of the basic, I always think more in terms of basic techniques for papercraft versus, and then within those techniques are the forms. And so so some of the basic techniques are paper folding, paper cutting, paper rolling, and scoring. I think those are the main four. And then
would a score be a cut that doesn't remove a piece? It's like
I guess it's a form. Yes, I guess technically. So scoring is just running the blade over the surface so you can create, it doesn't cut all the way through it, so you can create a clean fold.
Okay.
Yeah. So usually it's running an Xacto knife or even a bone folder along a ruler to create a really clean fold. You use it in bookmaking a lot. Okay. And in different forms of paper folding and sculpture. So
I had to MacGyver I shipped a commission yesterday, and I had to MacGyver a box. And I was doing that. I didn't know
Yeah.
what it was called, but yeah, that's what I was doing. I was
Yeah. So
taking like
scoring.
old
Yeah.
poster boxes and scoring them to make my own box. Yeah, cool.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, and so within those techniques, you get a lot of all the kind of well-known paper art traditions and some that maybe aren't as well known. So there's like paper cutting, which is probably the most prevalent form of paper art around the globe that I know of. That's the most kind of traditional form where you start with a flat sheet of paper and you're cutting the negative space out. So you're left with this really kind of two-dimensional sheet that has a lot of negative space cut in it. And those are some of the earliest paper art forms. And that kind of form of paper art really arises in all cultures all over the world, from Asia to Africa, Latin America, like everything. Even if it's not paper they're necessarily cutting out of, but there is that. And then there's paper foldings like origami.
Mhm.
Kirigami is another name for paper cutting, and then
So
quilling.
paper cutting would be is
I got me.
I think kind of well, not universally, but a lot of cultures make the snowflakes with the symmetry.
Yeah, that's exactly it, like a snowflake. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a photograph of it, but the black is obviously the paper.
Yes.
And if you start to follow a lot of paper artists, I would say 90, maybe not that high, but I would say like 75% of the paper artists whose work, or who are kind of tagging themselves as paper artists on Instagram, are paper cutters.
Gotcha.
Um, and that's a really kind of easy, it's not easy necessarily, it is a sort of an entry into the paper arts that people, but there's some amazing paper artists, paper cutters, really exploiting. It's having a real renaissance and explosion of people working in that medium.
I would feel that, I teach elementary art, and I think that, what is it, Matisse? We would call it a drawing with scissors, right? So
Yeah.
it seems to be a natural bridge from using a hand or a knife. An Xacto knife is basically a pen knife, right? So there's kind of this natural bridge from drawing to cutting with a tool like that, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. That was an amazing, awesome breakdown of everything you just said. Had so much value. So thank you so much. So there's like the texture of so you broke it down into three main parts. There's like people that exploit the texture of the paper. There's people that exploit the edge, and then there's people that what was the one I'm missing?
There's the edge, the shape, and then the surface. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Now somewhere, and this is I think why I always hit this like roadblock, is somewhere in all of that, isn't there some like people that get into crazy physics and stuff about the folding and the cutting, and aren't there did people use paper to figure out how to like fold up solar arrays and stuff, and like satellites and stuff like that? Isn't there like
Yeah.
crazy there?
Yeah, so there's some, yeah, so I think you're talking about the artist Matthew Schleon. I may be mispronouncing his name, but he's I believe a Michigan-based paper artist who is probably one of the most famous paper folders out there right now. And so I think I'm not sure if he was involved with that. I know he does a lot of collaboration and research, I believe, with people at the University of Michigan. But he does a lot of sort of geometric paper forms that are repeating motifs that I definitely have applications to science that he's working with. Yeah.
I think anytime you could take a whole bunch of surface area and make it really small, but still have folded in there all of the surface area, that's crazy to me. So
yeah,
we'll leave that for another conversation or something.
There's a great book. I did pull out a couple of my favorite books in these different forms. So one of the favorite books that I use to sort of get inspiration from for paper folding, and it's by a guy named Paul Jackson, who's based in the UK. And this is one of his books available online, but it has all of these great templates and how-to patterns if you want to explore geometric paper folding. So he's a great, pretty well known in the field too.
Yeah, geometry is something I've always wanted to explore myself, but just haven't sat down and done it yet. So one of my favorite artists of all time is actually a recent addition the past 5 years, is the paper artist Jen Stark. Are you familiar with Jen Stark?
Yeah.
To me, it's like, do you remember the Lisa Frank Trapper Keepers and all that beautiful, vibrant? I just feel like Jen Stark I'm just making assumptions, was like a Lisa Frank girl at school. She had all this awesome, colorful art supplies, and somewhere in her heart, she was able to like hold on to that as she became a, a professional artist. It's so playful, but it's so technical. Um, she kind of creates, these portals using layers of paper. Um, so would that be exploiting the edge when you're making like a hole? Let's say you have like a star-shaped hole and it's like descending down. Would you say that's
Sure. I mean, I
exploiting
think
the edge?
she's a great example of someone who I know started out, some of the early works of hers that I saw a long time ago, up to like a decade ago, for
Yeah.
longer, were these like stacked cardstock, multicolored
Yeah.
layers that she was cutting repeating forms and concentric forms, and they kind of spill outward. And
Yeah.
so I think that it was sort of brilliant in the way that she sort of just came at took the two-dimensional media, and was able to translate that into all of the amazing things that she's doing now with like laser cut. I'm not sure if it's aluminum, these powder coated forms, and the
Mhm.
digital work that she's doing, and the drawings and the prints. They're
Let
really
let's show one
beautiful.
of your aluminum pieces, because I think one question I had for you is, um, a lot of materials have texture, shape, and edge, right? So
Yeah, totally. Anything really that's planar. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
and but you broke it down for us beautifully. Like terms that would have taken me years to figure out on my own. So I have here written down, like, my question is, there are other non-paper materials that translate well from paper. Um, Jen Stark and I'm just like sorry, I'm just making sure I ask my question correctly, because sometimes I totally flop on some of my important questions. So let's look at here it is. Let's show this. Okay. So that is aluminum, right?
Yeah, that is powder coated. It's a laser cut aluminum sheet. I think it's about an eighth of an inch thick. That's been laser cut, those patterns. So the space that you're seeing through, you're seeing through the lines to the space behind it,
Sure.
and it's powder coated. Each of the panels are powder coated. And so this is a public piece that I did for a local library here in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's a 15 panel, sort of a divider between kind of like an outdoor area that's adjacent to the library and a bike pavilion. And so this is actually the backside of it.
Okay.
But you can still sort of see, and definitely, yes. I mean, my experience working, I've done a couple of public artworks, this one, and then one earlier, like in 2015, that was sort of cut. It was laser cut high density foam that was painted with enamels, oil enamels, and then glued together into these abstract tower shapes. And that was an indoor piece. But certainly, like my experience, like cutting paper and thinking about layering things two-dimensionally,
Okay.
has informed ideas I have for other kinds of work occasionally that are not paper based, but that kind of come out of an experience of working with paper.
I think this brings up a good question. Someone's like, everybody at some point, as an artist or any type of creative, or even if you're like I used to be a landscape designer, right? At some point, you have to be able to tell someone or convince them that, hey, I know you know me as like a paper artist, but just so you know, I could cut metal and install it outside of your library, and you never have to worry about it blowing away. You never have to worry
Mm-hmm.
about, like, how does an artist convince somebody that maybe doesn't know a lot about their medium that, like, hey, like, my skill set can do this big crazy metal thing too? Is that done by like just creating a proposal and renderings? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they're different. So the public art, the process for specifically maybe what you're asking about, or what I have experience with, are making public artworks. And for both of the situations where where I was chosen to actually produce the work,
Mhm.
um, I wasn't the sort of jury or the selection committee knew my work as being paper based, but yeah, in the process of coming up with the proposal and the application for whatever you're going to do. you have to do some kind of legwork up front and figure out kind of what you're going to make. And part of the process, the application process, is explaining like really clearly what this is going to be.
Sure.
And so so you kind of think about it while you're putting the proposal together, and I had already been thinking about working with laser cut aluminum for a long time. I have artist friends that have done it a lot. And so it was something that I knew could be done. I've seen other paper cut artists like, I'm spacing on her name right now. It's a famous kind of New York artist who works with paper. She's done a ton of public works, translating her two-dimensional paper cuts into these like aluminum fences and murals and things in subway stations. And so I just knew it could be done. And so it's just putting it together and
putting in a presentation for the like basically like an actual, you're making a document that's a artist proposal or like an application.
Yeah.
Has renderings and clearly states what's going on.
Correct. Yeah. And it depends on how far along you move along in the process too, then you produce a material sample. So if they break it down to maybe a couple of people, you'll do a more elaborate proposal, and they may ask you, sometimes they'll give you a little money up front just to produce a small maquette, a small version out of the material, so you can actually see the process from start to finish and show them like, this is a piece of what this will look like. And so as you're getting into it, everyone knows that it can be done. But I mean, there's problems all the time and things, like but that's kind of the thrill of doing that kind of work. And what I love about doing it in relation to the paper art is, paper is something I know really well, as far as like how to put it together and how to, and it's something I have like total control over. I never have to hire a fabricator, or it never leaves my control in order to be made. It's like, these actually are specifically about me having this really personal relationship with like the process and kind of having a back and forth with it and seeing as it goes along. Whereas, you take a real leap of faith sometimes with public artworks, especially if you're not someone who, like, I have to source all of those things out. I have to find fabricators to do it.
Yeah.
But that's just having developed. What I love about that is what I learn about the new materials and just meeting people and finding out things that they know. And
sure.
Well,
that sounds like when you're creating a proposal, one thing that sounds good about that process is you more or less have like a educated audience on some level, where you're not just trying to convince, say, like a homeowner, like, I can do a metal thing in your backyard. I could do a sculpture, even though it's paper. You're talking to people that have at least been around the block with public art projects and stuff like that. So they at least have some Rolodex in their mind, not just of paper, where they could kind of know what you're talking about. So you're not starting at complete ground zero, right?
Yeah. Depending on the scale of the project. I mean, like for the library project, I was really lucky because I had kind of the full support of like the Maddison, the like city, like Department of Engineering, or I think, or the construction office of like urban construction, who was building this new library. And so it was part of the kind of construction budget of the library. So I was really able to, and usually if you're making a public art piece, or even a large scale private commission that's going with a business, if it's of a certain scale, you'll be meeting with the architects and the building engineers and people who know how to build, like really build things,
Yeah. And you can, and if you have a good relationship, you kind of count on those people, right? Like,
yeah. And that's what I love about, working with paper. I'm like, I know I can glue this to this. And then, because I go with the same mindset, is sort of like, I know this can fit on this shape, and realistically, we should be able to do this thing, right? Like, but can we mount this metal frame to this bike rack? And like, I would have no idea how to do that, but in theory, I'm like, it's got to be able to be done, because people build all sorts of crazy stuff.
Like, my graduate degree was in landscape architecture, which when I meet people, I say architecture because people think I studied how to spread mulch for 3 years, but I quickly noticed that, architects don't build models just for fun. Building models are not fun. If at least they're not at 3 a.m, right? So you don't really know how to build something. You'd be surprised how much you learn when the cardboard or that balsa wood goes together, and you're like, this if this doesn't hold up a tiny, 1 foot model, it's not going to hold up a building, right? This
Sure.
whatever joint or thing you have going on, it's like, so you do learn about, I don't know, is architectonics a word? I don't know. There's kind of silly like pseudoscience in architecture. So I think this brings us to like a good segue to my next question. So you've got a lot of experience getting yourself into galleries, and that's kind of like a huge question for like any starting artist, is like, how do you get yourself into a gallery? But I actually wanted to ask you something before that, because you mentioned public art, which I know at least you could go online and there's like institutions in everyone's city that has funds or like openly advertises, hey, we have these grants, please apply. We'll give you $1,000, paint a picnic bench, right? The but you did mention that when you have like a private person, like at a business or a corporation, how does one find gigs like that? How do you know when someone's looking for a mural in their incubator space or their restaurant?
I might not be the best person to answer that question. I mean, I know because I haven't done a lot. I have done a few private commissions
Mhm,
for like hospitals and
mhm.
for some other. I did I did a big paper cow for a dairy company that's based here in Wisconsin a couple
Nice.
years ago, and both of those opportunities came to me through an art consultant who
Mhm.
was basically advising the companies or the hospital on the collection of the art. So she was the kind of person reaching out to other artists, or she was creating calls for submissions or
Okay.
proposals for those spaces. So it really just depends. I mean, if it's, sometimes like I have a friend who's a muralist in town, and she, it's I don't know the trajectory of her career, but it's not uncommon for like an artist just to like, especially if they're a muralist, to get just to approach a business that's got a blank wall and say like, hey, can I paint on your wall?
Sure.
And then we'll use that as a stepping off point or as a way to get attention to the next job, or
Sure.
one thing leads to another. So it never hurts if you know you have work that might fit within a context. It never hurts to approach the business owner, whoever it is, and like ask if they're interested in having your work there or you doing something there.
That's a very excellent tip, right? Context. What place around you has a similar vibe? What
Mhm.
what or what can you deliver to someone? What do you know that you could provide to a business or a place or a restaurant, wherever, where you know you could fit their style and bring value to them? I think that's a really good starting point for that.
Yeah, because I know a lot. I mean, we could talk about galleries, but I know,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
a lot of artists that they sort of envision that as like, and it is. I mean, that's what galleries are for. But it is. There are so many. Like there's here in Wisconsin, here at the University of Wisconsin, where I teach. We have an organization called the Center for Healthy Minds, which is an institute that does research about meditation. And a lot of my work is sort of invested in some ways in thinking about in sort of meditation, and there's a sort
mm,
of relationship between that and my meditation practice. And so I thought about just going, and their office isn't too far from my studio, and I walk by it all the time. I just haven't. I keep thinking every time I walk by, like I want to go in there and ask them if they want to hang my work up for a while, or just to do an exhibition of my
sure,
work in the context of the space, even if it's temporary, because then it would be an opportunity. If I were looking to kind of create, if I wanted to create a show that wasn't dependent on someone coming to me to say like, oh, I want to put your work somewhere, um, it would, it would, it could be an opportunity for me as the artist to like, yeah, approach and have my work in a certain context. And that way you can, kind of do it yourself basically.
so would that be a good okay, so would that let's talk about galleries. So um I purposely have kept myself like away from galleries. I kind of had this like egalitarian, almost like evangelical idea about art, where like everybody should do it. It should always be like everyone should have access to it. And when I think of galleries, it's obviously a place for to view art, but they have a they at least in our culture have a reputation for being these like stuffy places with like pedantic conversations and stuff like that. But every artist wants to know, like, how do you get into a gallery? And so let's pretend like you're an educator, you have college students, right? You have people that are going to be walking out of your doors in May, and they're not going to know where to go or what to do. Do you have any advice for people who are looking to get a toe in to a gallery?
Yeah, I don't know if it's advice, but as much as I can kind of explain some of the things that happened to me, and some of the ways that I think might give you kind of expose you to galleries and expose galleries to your work, as was what you really want to do.
Sure.
And so I think that first of all, I would sort of ask myself, like, do I really need a gallery? Like, do I just want one because I think it's going to like elevate my work in some way or put my work in a different context? Or like, do I want to just sell my work? Is that what I really want? Or do I want it to be written about? Like, what do you think galleries are going to do for you? Because they can be a place where you certainly can sell your work. They can be a place where you get, other curators see your work and put it in other exhibitions and museums. Yeah. I mean, they can do a lot of different stuff. But it can also, not all galleries are the same. Obviously, not all galleries are the best fit for the artists, for every artist. So
there's context again, right? Like
you don't want to.
He wouldn't be famous if he was going around trying to get people to hang up his rat drawings, in galleries, right?
So, yeah, it's as much about like it. I mean, there's a great book called The Artist Guide by Jackie Battenfield. I feel like I'm plugging like all this stuff, but there's a great book by a classic professional practices book called The Artist Guide.
Okay,
it's available. I'm not sure if it's been updated, but it's and that talks about kind of ways to approach and kind of develop your career. And it does talk a lot about how to find gallery representation. And a big part of that is also doing your own research and finding like what galleries fit for you. Like, where do you think your work would fit in? And so it'd be, so after you get over, if you kind of get through the question of like, why do you want a gallery? And you're like, yeah, I really want a gallery. It's like, I want to see my work there. I want to work with an art dealer. I want all those opportunities that come with having my work in a gallery. Then, what I would do is I would look in the land. I would look locally first. Like, where do you live? And are there galleries in the city where you're living where you think you could show your work? That seems like a good fit for what you do. So you've been to the gallery a lot. You've seen what other artists that they show. And you're like, hey, I could see my work here. Or like, they don't show anyone like me, but I could see, so maybe they might be interested in what I do because it's so different from other things, but it's still kind of related in some interesting way, sure. Right? And so then if you had the luxury of actually like living in that city, I would just start going to the openings all the time, like go to every one of their shows, all their openings, just hang around, look at the other artists. If they're like a regional gallery or local, if they're a gallery in the city that you live, chances are many of the artists that they work with probably live in that community too. So like, get to know those artists. You could reach out and ask the artist for a studio visit, following them online, liking their posts, that kind of things too. Right. And then once you become like, it's definitely like, I'm not the first one to say it, but there's as much of a kind of a social component to it as anything. It's like, once you're in the mix and going and people kind of know who you are, it's not that much of a leap to sort of have the dealer or the gallerist come to your studio and do a studio visit. But I think, it does take a while to kind of cook if you're trying to develop that relationship. That
could be all very fun. I think it's important to note that all of the stuff that you just described can be very fun, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, if it feels like, if you're like gripping and super nervous about it, don't do it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and you find another way because, I mean.
And I wanted to interject for a second because for anyone who doesn't know, I didn't not too long ago. You'd be very surprised at how zeroed in some of these galleries get about what they want to show. Like there's probably galleries out there that almost only want to show papercraft, right? There's,
Yeah, yeah, I wish.
you know,
Yeah,
or
there are a few dealers. Yeah, there are a few galleries that are like better than others in terms of the paper artists that they show.
mhm.
But yeah, there's
So there's no like there, and I guess I'm like picturing some like smaller, like maybe I'm thinking, sorry, like collectors, right? There's some people who like maybe only collect collage
yes,
art, collect
yes,
paper
yeah, yeah,
craft,
yeah,
and
definitely,
like those people are like literal customers,
yeah,
and they have the places that they go to buy and
yeah.
hang out. Yeah. I was surprised to see how zeroed in like some people get um into like certain medium for collecting, or a certain style of artwork at a gallery. Like, oh,
Mhm.
it's like a pop surrealism gallery, or
Yeah,
uh,
totally, yeah.
these wealthy people like only want to buy collage. It's pretty neat,
Yeah, and
There's
there
a
are
tribe
certain
out
like
there.
collage-based galleries for sure that but I know I would just say, just to kind of circle back to the idea of of finding a gallery, I would just say like, show up, try to be a good citizen, try to get to know who the dealer is, get to know the artist. I know an artist recently who got picked up by another gallery because she started following them on Instagram and like liking all their posts or commenting on certain things that she liked that they were showing. And
Mhm.
and because the dealer kept seeing like, who is this person who's commenting, like they looked at her work just on Instagram and reached out to her to develop the relationship. So I'm not saying that's going to
Yeah.
work every time, but you know, I
It's
think it's
definitely good. It's definitely good to do that.
yeah.
You
But I would also say like, I mean, I'm a little old school in the sense that like I I think if I would have been like 10 years younger when earlier in my career when Instagram kind of happened, or I didn't have my I was well out of graduate school like 5 or 6 years before I got my website, and so I
Mhm.
just had no sense of like making my own work or selling my own work and building like a platform myself. Um,
Mhm.
and so it was, and I say that only because it might have been different for like, when I was in art school, the models that I had for the teachers that I was learning from were all gallery artists. And so it's sort of like, that's just how
Mhm.
I imagined a career went. And so
No,
that's really what I focused on when I got out of
well,
school.
sure. I mean, I graduated I got my BFA in like 2007, and like for the most part nothing had changed. Like in the social media, there was Facebook, that was about it. Like there was no like build your career as an artist on social media, like DM Steven Spielberg or Georgia O'Keeffe or whoever, right? That wasn't a thing yet. So we've come from a similar, you know, education background, and like one of my pet peeves about my own art education is like so much of it was all about stuff that only occurred in the gallery. I was joking on my last podcast, like I hope that, professors are teaching people how to set up at least an Etsy page before they leave, right? You know, because it's important, I think, that if you want to make art, the best thing you could do is sell your art and make money with it, right? Or get a grant, get paid for your art, and that'll just open up more opportunities. So it's all super solid advice for getting into a gallery. I think context is super important, deciding whether or not it's like good for you. I mean, maybe your context would be much better off in public art. Maybe your context would be fantastic at a dive bar. Maybe you could bring value to it's endless, right? And finding your spot seems like the most important thing first. Um, sorry, I tend to ramble, but you're laying down so much awesome information. You're laying down so much awesome information. Um, so we talked a bit about galleries. We talked a bit about like the actual different forms of papercraft. Um, People often like to talk about some of the more technical things. Um, what what paper do you like to use? Because me personally, and I'm totally being selfish with this question, is I want to know what paper you use because I'm interested in starting to mess with shapes, patterns, incorporate more paper craft into my collage practice, because don't want to totally be beholden to what I find in books.
Mm.
I want to be able to be like, you know what, I want like a Bridget Riley like op art pattern, like right now, let's do this. So let's keep it simple though. What kind of paper do you like to use? What's that beautiful colored paper that you use? You don't have to give us any trade secrets away, but I wouldn't even know where to start when it comes to
No, I'm happy to share it. So without getting too technical, so I use a lot of different kinds of paper. Without getting too technical, geeky, like paper is rated a little differently. So there's like bond paper, which is the thin printer paper, and a lot of magazines and print media is printed on something not as kind of light as bond paper. So it's very, very thin, right? Like magazine paper. And then there's cover stock paper. It's sort of like a parallel kind of just like line of commercial production kind of weight of paper. And so just any of your standard card stock is the kind of stock, the cover stock.
Sure.
And that comes in different weights, which just relates to the thickness. And so I use, or in my earlier work, I probably would use something, I probably have a sheet of it here. Something like a commercially, I don't use this currently, but this would have been like from my early work, just like a commercially printed, colored cardstock that's about 60 or 80 pounds. Yeah, you probably have something really similar, right? Yeah. And
These
so
are repurposed word cards. They were throwing them in the dumpster.
Oh, like perfect. Yeah. That's probably, I'm sure that's a cover stock or something. And so, but I use as the work that I've been making, and I use this kind of just almost scrapbooking paper for years and years with my work. And I used a company called Bazzil, Bazzill, or Basil. Really beautiful colors.
Is that when you were doing like your more like shape work?
Yeah. So this is, I
don't have any of those in my slideshow.
I just got this back it was hanging in the art office on campus actually.
Wow.
So this is a piece that goes back to 2008.
Amazing.
And this is just with that colored cardstock, and it's in good shape. It has faded a little bit because I wasn't really paying attention to the kind of color fast quality of the paper that I was using.
So for those of you just listening, Michael's holding up like a 2x2 square, and it's covered with these like spiky eyebrow shapes and like all these eyes, and there's like, gosh, and a ton of layers, and it's got like some 3-dimension to it. It's like a whole bunch of kind of monster eyeballs looking at you.
So when I started making the paper stuff that I'm doing now, I was using some of that paper, but I wanted something that was a little better quality, that I knew wouldn't degrade, that was acid free basically, and that the color quality was richer. So I tried a lot of different papers. I ended up making a lot of work with this brand called Color Plan. A lot of paper artists work with this. It's a UK based company called GF Smith that produces it, but you can order it here in the States. Legion Paper sells it, and you can also buy it through Talus, which is a bookmaking supply company in Brooklyn that you can buy. And so with Color Plan, it comes in this little sample book that I got. It shows different weights that it comes in. I don't know if you can see that, but it comes in, so it's from like 100 GSM, which is more like almost like a bond paper, to up to like 700 GSM, which is almost like a thick mat board. And so when I'm working on a piece, I usually order 2 different weights, 2 different thicknesses. I ordered the 270 GSM and the 350. I know it's very like paper geeky sounding, but it just works with, one's a little thinner and I can roll it better and do some kind of more organic kind of loose cuts. And the other stuff is really about thicker structure. So when I order those sheets, they come in, as opposed to like a 12 by 12 inch sheet of cardstock, these come in sheets of about 28 by 40.
Okay.
And so, I just cut those down, and the larger size sheets allow me to kind of make more elaborate shapes because I don't have to like cut small areas and then glue things on them. And I use Color Plan to get back to just the really simple question, what kind of paper I use. I use the Color Plan line by GF Smith, and then I use a line by a company called Mohawk Paper, and I
Okay.
use their Curious Metallic collection is what I'm working on now.
Let's pull up one of your paper sculptures.
Mm.
This is relatively recent, right?
Yeah, I started that one in January of last year, I think. It's January, February. It's kind of like
How
this.
long did it take you to make?
I make about 4 pieces a year. I'm slowly getting faster.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they on average, they take between 2 to 4 months, depending on how elaborate they are and how much time I have to work on them. But
How many hours a week can you slam on something like that? Because
uh,
you're teaching classes.
yeah, when I really get down into it, if I'm really disciplined, I could be in the studio. I could easily find 40 hours a week to be in the studio or
Excellent.
longer. And I'm probably yeah I'm so usually on average it's about 20 to 40 hours a week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, working on a like we just had Lance Letcher. I don't. Are you familiar with his work?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and it sounds like he can spend quite a bit of time on individual pieces too. Is To me that's almost like terrifying sounding. I'd be happy to work on something that long, but is that something that you it seems to me that you'd almost kind of have to know that someone's going to buy this thing eventually in order to pour that much work into it. Is that something that would be more comfortable for an artist such as yourself that has got a little bit of a longer career and you could, work 3 months on one piece? I mean,
Mm.
I don't know. It's kind of a silly question because I'm sure there's painters and all sorts of other people that take that long to make stuff. Um, I don't know. That's just wild. I make stuff in a few days, you know. Um,
Well, I have made work, these colorful collages that I showed you earlier. I
mhm,
used to be able to produce that in like like 2 or 3 days at the most.
mhm.
And then I was producing a lot more work earlier in my career as when I was working in paper art like that. And so, but the sculptures are kind of purposely slow. They kind of were. I sort of talk about, and a lot of artists kind of identify this experience. Like I started thinking about kind of, I started realizing that like I was going into my work, kind of trying to think about like what my work could get me,
Mm,
and then so I was just like producing because I was another show, and so it was really just a means to like attain some sense of accomplishment. And not that I wasn't engaged, I was completely connected to the work, but I started realizing I was exploiting it in a way that just felt kind of icky, and then I started not really enjoying my experience in the studio as much as I did after a while, and so I was doing some of those public pieces that you showed images of that took me out of the paper art, out of the studio where I was working with paper. And when I got back to the studio, it was part of just like a whole process of kind of like reevaluating why I made work and what the intention was with the work. And I do have the luxury of having this teaching job. So if I don't sell a piece, I'm not, I can still survive. I can pay my studio rent and those kinds of things.
sure.
Um, and so I sort of took the focus off of that element of it. Don't get me
Sure.
wrong, like I love
No, I almost wanna
touring the
repeat what
galleries, and I
I would
still
like to repeat what you said because I think that's, like, really insightful. That probably you said you meditate? I think that I yeah, that amount of insight. I know you're not like, that amount of insight, I could tell that you meditate because the for you to be able to look at your own metacognition at your artwork and say like, "Oh, I'm doing this and I'm fully engaged in it," but you have one step back in your consciousness and you're looking at it, you're like, "Oh, but I'm trying to get something out of this right now. I'm running like a program in the back of the brain compartment," and you realize that you weren't happy with it. It started to feel icky. I recently um, have dealt with like a similar thing, but you helped me realize it because one of my favorite quotes in art is "Art should be quick." Is
Mm,
Andy Warhol.
mm.
that was exactly what I needed to hear when I was in college,
Mm,
because I was like at the time obsessing over like Alex Gray, which was
mm,
just like this mind blowing, anatomical, crazy,
yeah.
really intense, old school crafted work. And when I heard that art needs to be quick, I was like, okay, well, if Andy said it, let's do it. And the past 2 years, I embraced the quickness. I embraced the idea of the factory. I think if Andy Warhol was around during social media, he would, Kim Kardashian would have been on his prints, not Marilyn Monroe. Kim Kardashian takes a picture, all of a sudden there's millions of Kim Kardashian faces like all over the planet, you know. So, and that worked for me because I went viral on TikTok. I have some videos that have like 7 million views on there, and that was wild and it was awesome. But I have 85,000 followers sitting on TikTok, and I barely visit them right now because like I know in my heart that that's run its course, and I don't want to make art for a 1-minute video anymore, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so it's really interesting that you were able to kind of put your finger on it and realize that you were kind of trying to make your art dance maybe in a certain way.
Hmm.
And that prevents what is the mystery of creating an art making, right? Like if you're not letting it bloom and become its own thing, you know, from wherever it comes from, then we're not really going to know what it can ultimately be in the long run, right? If we just try to force our will upon it constantly. So, wow, awesome. I totally cut you off. Do you remember what
Oh.
you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I just think
Yeah.
it was. I mean, you were kind of asking about, the slowing down of the work of the kind
Yes.
of production,
Mhm.
and it is something that that does take as it's sort of flipped now in some ways, because like I've been getting invitations to show the work, and having, it sort of is, it's I wouldn't. It's actually, it's sort of, I wouldn't say limited, but it has made me have to be more, just sort of like careful about the kinds of things that I do commit to. So it's almost like going to put a ceiling on the kinds of things that I can do in terms of like committing to doing a particular show, or things like, or kinds of opportunities related to the sculpture work specifically, because I don't have, I can't produce them. And so, but I like, I'm sort of into that. Like I don't want to hire, I don't want to get them laser cut. I just want to like keep them as these like bespoke objects that just take a long time to make.
My mentor who taught me how to meditate said, solitude is the price of greatness,
Mm. That's a good quote.
and
Mm.
um, I have a habit of wanting to do 5,000 things at once. And my friend just sent me a nice, quick little Seth Godin podcast, and he was calling it was about project debt,
Mm.
where just like with money, if you buy all this stuff and you can have debt, right? With project debt, you could say, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm gonna start the podcast. I'm gonna do your poster. I'm gonna make your mural. All of a sudden, you have project debt. You're like
Hmm.
beholden to all of this stuff, and you're not
Yeah,
like
that
letting
makes
it
sense.
overnight. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of, I mean, not guilty of it, but I've done a lot of side things over the years, and I've been trying to like actually, yes, I mean, I've run galleries like out of my house, and done other projects and curated things of other artists' work. And so I've been just, I like doing all that stuff, because I've always liked to have a hand in the like kind of like keeping the community going, and just sort of like you have, like you're doing, right? You're contributing to your community through this project. But I, as I've gotten older, I'm just sort of in a period now of just kind of like reducing kind of what I'm doing, the amount of things I'm doing, to this kind of like one thing. And it feels good. Not that I won't do other things at a certain later, but right now it's just sort of, it's
Hmm.
kind of
Yeah,
contracting.
that's great. I feel like that comes naturally because when you're a young artist, it's kind of terrifying to think like, I really like Salvador Dali, but am I going to be a painter? Or am I going to be a surrealist? And like, we're so used to like labeling all these things we're learning about, and it's like kind of terrifying to think about signing onto a medium or like one project. And yeah, it just kind of happens naturally, right? You've been messing with paper for a super long time, and who knows, a few years from now, you might not be making sculptures anymore. You could be making something totally different, and it'll feel just as natural.
It's too true. Very true.
Let's see. I think we covered a lot of stuff. Oh, I got to ask the glue question real quick.
Oh yeah.
Everyone wants to know. I get lots of different answers. What kind of glue do you like to use?
My favorite glue is it's just a white PVA glue by Line Co.
Okay.
This is sort of like one of their most people recognize like the black and gold label. They make a lot of archival based products. They make a wide range of products and tools, but the PVA glue is just a really high standard. It's acid free, and as it dries, it doesn't crack. It stays clear, and it's like slightly flexible. So for what I do, it's good for flat work. When I do super flat work, I like to use Yes paste. I don't know, is that a collage? Is that a paste you've used before?
I know I've seen it before. Yeah.
It's a thick, clear, water-based glue. So for instance, this is done with Yes paste.
Okay.
And you get a little bit of it out and you brush it on the back. But this is almost 12 years old, and it's still totally like nothing's falling off, nothing's cracked. Like Yes paste is really a great glue. But for what I do, because I use so many small parts that I'm gluing, three-dimensionally, the Line Co is great.
So white glue is similar to, like, everyone knows, like the Elmer's glue, right? Like it is.
It's and they're different. But they're different. They're slightly, So it's still like I think it's polyvinyl acetate. They call it PVA glue. I think all white glues are essentially, but some are just higher quality than others. And so I know that
you like to kind of like make a real thin bead on like the edge of the paper, and then just like
I do that. Yeah. I mean, I just glue right on it. A lot of it has to do. So when people always ask me what kind of glue I use, I always talk about the glue, but the glue containers are also really important.
Yeah, I was going to say the applicator is probably interesting. Yeah, there we go.
These needle tip applicators. And then I also have, I don't know if you know this one. This is by Fast Clap. It's for wood glue. And it
looks like a water pick. What does it? Oh, yeah. It just tips, and then that's just a cap on the end?
Yeah, okay. So it comes out of here.
Is that European made?
I think it's here in the US.
Oh, we figured out how to make the cap not fall off. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it sort of the glue goes down and then comes up here, and there's something about the design that makes it not.
And it's almost like a chisel. I don't know what to call it, but it's like a chisel tip instead of a comb.
Yeah. And so for like flat stuff, I have a larger one, and it's got a flat. It never clogs. It dries on the tip, but it never kind of clogs. But there's something about the design. But this is really good for like long areas if I'm doing long strips or things like that.
That's definitely been the best glue rundown we've had so far. That's a lot of neat stuff. Yeah, the applicator, that's a huge thing to consider. Let's see. Is there anything I didn't cover? This has been an awesome conversation, Michael. I mean, I think that was really good. Is there anything you want to add, or anything that you were excited to talk about? Oh, I know we could talk for hours, man. I'm really enjoying this. Is there anything that you wanted to add? Because I know we were going to talk about the Makernas and stuff like that, but we don't necessarily need to get into.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We could talk another time. Maybe I would love you have. You're the only other person that I know that's doing any kind of paper-based conversation.
Yeah, you have a podcast, right?
But it's not a podcast. I just do an Instagram live interview series called Shooting the Sheet. And I generally, that's why I was cracking up on the name of yours also. And I just interview paper-based artists. So I would love to have you on there as well.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
We could continue the conversation on Shooting the Sheet sometime.
Absolutely. So I would definitely love that. Now, Michael, if anyone wants to learn more about your artwork or say hello, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
So I'm pretty active on Instagram. That's a good place to find me. It's just Michael Veliquette. And I have a website. You can definitely send me an email on my website, but just sending me a message on Instagram is also an easy way to find me. And my website's just my last name, Velliquette.com.
And what if somebody wants to enroll in their spring semester classes?
Oh, geez.
What do
I
you?
would
What do
say
you?
get in line, get on the wait list. No, so I
Oh,
teach.
cool.
I teach at the University of Wisconsin. Actually, don't teach paper art. I teach essentially an art appreciation course, but it's art for non-majors. It's called Introduction to Art, and we have a packed crowd, but it's
Cool.
it's a great class. I love teaching it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Michael Veliquette, thank you so much for joining us on the Cut It Out podcast. I know I'm going to be listening to this one a bunch of times. I'm going to look at a few of those books and maybe get a needle tip glue applicator too. We'll see.
You could definitely, I could see you using it.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
David. Yeah, my pleasure. See you.